So I wanted to, I want you to stay a little longer. I guess the ones who have stayed for the whole day are getting a little tired, perhaps. But I don't want to drag this on too much. But it would be really nice to hear a little bit about some thoughts about what we've been talking about today. What I draw from this is, and it's maybe surprising, maybe not, is how really the question of specialists, experts, people with knowledge, how central it is, and how difficult it really is to accommodate the experts in the democratic ideas we are talking about. And I find it, I must say, I'm a little bit surprised at the way you describe experts in your talk, Ellen. I wonder if we are talking about something specifically French. Probably not, but maybe to some extent. We had a deliberative poll here in Iceland about the constitution, about constitutional revision in the fall. Deliberative polls, of course, have been conducted very often. They're nothing new, but it was the first experience of a deliberative poll for me. And there were several things that I found really very interesting to experience myself. One thing was the over 2 days, the significant increase that you can feel in recognition and respect of the participants towards each other. That's a very clear, just in the atmosphere of the meeting. We had experts coming. I mean, this is not the intense format of the climate of the citizens convention on climate change, but it's just sort of one event. But still, we had experts coming in explaining certain technical or difficult issues about certain things in the constitution. And I never felt this heavy atmosphere, this sort of closing atmosphere, at least not except with some exceptions. So, but maybe in that case, we had the meeting, the people, the participants had first had themselves a 2-hour discussion on a topic. Then they met the experts. So they had really sort of, even those who didn't know much about the topics, they would have learned a lot during these 2 hours before the experts came. So, and then there's one thing which I find is really, and maybe the most interesting, because also, Albany, you're thinking about what do we take from these mini publics, from these assemblies. I mean, one of the accusations that you always get about public views is, the trade-offs will be forgotten. So people will demand lower taxes and they won't realize, what it means. They don't see the trade-offs. But what we saw in this, and I mean, that's, I guess, typical for an assembly of this sort, is exactly the how easy it is for a normal person to understand and appreciate the trade-offs and realize that in the end, what you choose depends not only on what you want, but also on the trade-offs that you know about. And we see also, I mean, it was a funny sort of twist when certain things that had been that had come out of this assembly in one of the surveys that was done was picked up by the politicians. And certain politicians then started to claim that the Icelanders demand this and that, which could certainly be read from the survey. But if you went into the changes in the opinions that had gone on and so on, you could easily see that the citizens, that the people participating were, very conscious of the trade-offs, more so than actually the politicians. So I think, and then, we come to this question of considered opinions. And of course, why do people change their opinions? And that's maybe the interesting questions. In a deliberative poll, you actually have a lot of evidence that helps you understand that, which I think is one of the great benefits of this method. But the question really is, I mean, if we go again to the experts, and especially talking about climate, I mean, for many scientists, science communication is simply this: to get the people to understand the truths that the scientists know. And this is very bad science communication, actually. So and because I think Lisa mentioned this, communicating science. I mean, maybe the question that would be interesting to sort of throw out, and I'm not expecting anyone to answer that question, but I just find this a very interesting take of from the day, sort of what can we really say about public expert relationships? Is there anything new? And maybe even, I mean, you said so, Ellen, you said probably the pandemic is not going to teach us so much new, and I kind of agree, but maybe it's going to force us to reevaluate in a very interesting way, sort of public expert relations. Maybe that is the sort of perennial, the important democratic question at the moment. So throwing that out, the word is free for anyone to grab.
Yeah, can I continue on a few lines here?
Yeah.
So I've read a lot around in science communication and all these things recently, and it is actually quite interesting because this is somehow not part of the usual deliberative democracy literature. But what you just said was scientists usually thinking, oh, we just need to teach them the truth that we have. That's not at all the state of the art in science communication. And they call it the deficit model. So the lay people have a deficit that needs to be healed by the experts, and they all reject this. So I think there is actually a lot that can be learned there. And I think that's nice and important, but I've also been wondering quite a lot about the deeper societal structures that allow for the kind of mutual trust that different parts of society need to communicate with each other, whether it's experts and lay people or whether it's Democrats and Republicans in the US. I mean, what creates the social preconditions for these kinds of dialogues? And I think there is this, I mean, this is sort of a difficult and complex topic, but I think the fact that women have been emancipated and marriages have become more of a choice means that people mate among their own group very much. And that has probably contributed to this fragmentation thing. And then there's also the economic inequality and stratification and the sort of fixing of the boundaries of different social groups and classes and milieus. And I'm really sort of worried about how a society that is so much fragmented in all these different camps can continue to tackle the kinds of challenges like the Corona crisis, the ecological transformation, because these challenges all require that people talk to each other in that kind of egalitarian ethos that Ellen has just described so nicely. And I think you cannot just impose egalitarian communicative and deliberative structures on highly unequal, highly polarized, fragmented social and economic conditions. And I mean, that sort of circles back to Albina's talk at the beginning. I think these epistemic and deliberative questions are in the end all related to more structural features. And I'll stop here.
May I follow up on this? Exactly. Yeah. May I? Yeah, just to add to this, so indeed the fragmentation is one issue, but then what I called the precarity effect, it is making people react very short term. So even if we take this fully informed, randomly sampled publics, but their socialization within a political economy that makes them their livelihood dependent on polluting, on jobs that are polluting. And you put them to live in such circumstances that force them to think very short term. That already, it's clear in what direction this is going. So indeed, the questions of political economy are very seriously there. So not only in terms of inequality, but also this precarity. And we need to acknowledge that before we say, oh, as long as we have well-briefed, randomly sampled publics, we will know what the people want. All right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then, yeah, when you where do we start with that? You know, in a democratic society, if we want to change the political economy towards a longer term view, but we have made it dependent on jobs which survival depends on the short term view. So how do you unblock this? Is there an institutional answer to this blockage?
May I also step in?
Yeah.
Yes, I would like just to continue what Liza and Albina had just said. I think it's a very dangerous moment right now, and really many societies cannot afford the luxury of deliberation at this point, because decisions have to be taken immediately, and really the cost of these decisions is thousands of lives. And I think that at least two big cleavages have emerged. Because the virus has really fragmented our societies and polities. And one is experts versus the people. Because there is, on the one hand, there is expertocracy, and now political decisions are really taken on the power of the decision of experts without any proper public consultation. But on the other hand, we're so much infiltrated by conspiracy theories and political fragmentation and distrust that experts themselves become, stigmatized. Like, the chief epidemiologists are the most controversial figures right now. Like, take the scandal with Niall Ferguson in Great Britain, because he was like the key advisor, and he was like one of the key alarmists and the key advisor to the Johnson government. And now he has to step down because of the scandal. Well, for instance, the figure of the Swedish Andreas Tegnell. Once again, he is one of the most controversial figures now, and not in Swedish, but in the global public opinion. So there is this cleavage between experts and the public. So expertocracy versus distrust of experts. And secondly, there is a profoundly fragmented society, which Helen and Albina had mentioned already. And it's not just because of, women like marrying men of the same class or whatever, but it's because of the internet. It's because of this whole, the Trump election. It's because of the Facebook effect. It's because of the echo chambers. It's because we are now, compared to 10 years ago, dealing with a profoundly segmented and fragmented population everywhere. And therefore, the approaches to corona crisis are also politically charged and politically biased. There is an amazing political bias, for instance, in quarantine versus liberating the people along the partisan lines in the United States, Democrats versus Republicans. So the Democratic constituencies are more like quarantine biased, whereas the Republicans, and especially in the Republican belt and the Bible belt, they are more in the South. They are more against the quarantine, so the ones who arrived. So considering all these cleavages, I think it's a real threat to democratic and deliberative procedures. And I really have no easy solution, have no easy cure for this, because the issues at stake, once again, they're too big in many places to afford deliberation.
Yeah.
John, may I jump in?
Jose, you're next. Exactly.
Okay. So yeah, just to follow up exactly on this point, and maybe connecting with something that Lisa mentioned before. I think, one of the things, in a way we've been studying group polarization for a long time. It's definitely not a new thing. And when Cass Sunstein brought the discussion of group polarization to deliberative democracy from the psychology, cognitive psychology literature, he already mentioned that, one of the drivers of this group polarization is what he called enclave deliberation, right? So the echo chambers and the fact that people are not talking to people with different views. And actually the solution for this problem is actually having plural and diverse deliberation. So it's not surprising that, as you mentioned, John, in deliberative opinion polls, or what Hélène was explaining about the great debate in France and the other initiatives, it's not surprising that when people are in a situation of talking to people who think differently and so on, one of the immediate reactions is that they have a greater recognition for each other and greater respect. So that's the solution, right? So one of the problems we have, and this connects with what Sergey was saying, is that the internet has polarized the media that people are using, and we will receive news from very diverse media right now, and there's no middle ground. There's no common area or common public sphere where we can meet each other physically or virtually. And I think, at least I would say part of the solution should come from that perspective, from creating opportunities for people to have this kind of common conversation with people who think differently. And that's one of the limitations that I find actually in the idea of mini publics and deliberative opinion polls, because I think that, when we compare the deliberative opinion polls with what happened, for instance, in 2011 with the Indignados movement in Spain, or the Occupy movement in the States, or the similar movement in France. So back then, the people who participated in those movements and who were taking the squares and sitting in and having those conversations and so on, when you ask them what they value the most, what they learned from that experience, what they think it's most valuable from that experience, something that is always there in their responses is that they learned a lot by discussing with people who thought differently about many issues. So we have lots of evidence that participating in deliberations is a transformative event. So one of the problems I see with the mini public is that it's fantastic for the people who take participation in it, who participate in the mini public. It's not so evident that this benefit immediately extends to the rest of the society. So I think that it's great to organize mini publics and citizen assemblies and deliberative opinion polls. But I think we should invest more and pay more attention to, the Habermasian idea that we should increase the quality of the public debate. And if I may just add something very quickly to something you mentioned, John, about how people who took part in the deliberative opinion poll, even before they were confronted with the experts, they already started learning things and changing their views. Again, this is not a new thing, right? So when in the debate in the literature of punitivism in criminal law, there's been always this old theme that people, especially the public in the US, particularly the studies are most of them American, the public in the US were always supposed to be very punitive, right? And that's why penal populism is taken to be equivalent to people asking for increasing, making punishment harsher and so on and so forth. But it's very illuminating that as soon as you introduce some information, and the works of Julian Roberts, for instance, the works that he did 15, 20 years ago are great, I think. As soon as you introduce some minimal information provided by experts, the kind of information that criminologists can provide, very minimal. No, you don't need actually a textbook on criminal law or criminology. But as soon as you provide this background information, people immediately start changing their views. And it turns out, according to Julian Roberts at least, it turns out that in the end, people who are relatively slightly better informed, their opinions don't differ that much from those of experts. So this amounts to, this distinction between experts and non-experts that I think has been crossing through all the presentations and debates today.
Right. So we have a list now of people who want to speak. It's in this order: Bakar, Robert, Ellen, Brendan, Larry, and then Brendan. So Bakar, would you come next, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on the on the process, which is like related of a correlation between COVID-19 and the rethinking the idea of state. And to give just the example of Georgia, I think that in a way this crisis, it's a pandemic that helps in certain societies to rethink the idea of the state. For example, Georgia, for the last 25 years, the Georgian political class is constrained into neoliberal ideology, and they just simply cannot think the other way. And now, during this crisis, because of the COVID-19, the political class, at least government of Georgia, started kind of mental exercise to make a political reception of different ideas. For example, they started to think about need of reindustrialization, about need of local economic production, and etc., etc. And what's very important is that even though Georgia is considered to be kind of neoliberal state, during this COVID-19 crisis, actually Georgian state showed quite good reaction. And this is not because our political class is powerful, but this is a kind of a collective memory, or let's say it's a political memory rooted from Soviet Union that state had to react. So, I mean, there are still some, let's say, the traditions, like I would say the useful traditions related with the social responsibility of the state. And what is also very important, it's about science. The COVID-19 in Georgia, at least in the experience of this country, showed that the Soviet school of the science is still very useful. And there is a knowledge, there is a forgotten knowledge that was rediscovered because of the COVID-19. For example, Soviet Union had, and at least in Georgia, Georgia had one of the best practice in epidemiological research and in this field of medicine. And today the government completely realized, the government has a full trust to the scientists who belong to the Soviet school of medicine, who are not like children of post-communists, but they are children of the Soviet times. And I think it makes sense. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that, I mean, there is a hope that this crisis may provoke the certain societies to rethink the idea of the state, and again to listen to the scientists and the scholars. This may be like good lesson for them. I mean, at least we can hope for this. I mean, Georgian case shows this, for example, that there is a possibility that crisis could be used for something to do something better in the future, let's say.
Yeah. Robert, you want to continue?
Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much for an excellent conference, and been great to listen to you all today. So the point I want to make, as we are, as many of you know, we are practitioners of crowdsourcing and digital democracy. Working for the past 11 years. With projects like Better Reykjavik, and now more recently with the Scottish Parliament, providing online spaces, basically government spaces that are designed for deliberation and crowdsourcing, including like participatory budgeting and that sort of projects. So before COVID, the biggest challenge those projects were facing from our perspective was capacity of governments to actually run those sort of projects, and then also capacity to actually promote them and actually let citizens know about those opportunities. And while now we have more need for those sort of spaces than ever, really, because there's a lot of new decisions that need to be taken, and a lot of controversial things that are happening and will be happening over the next months and years because of the economic aspect of all of this. And in terms of Jose, your talk this morning, then this is just one sort of brick in that problem as well, in terms of that being a fallacy or not, just the practicalities of governments on all levels, not having the staff that can help to create those engagement methods, being it citizen assemblies or online methods, whatever it is. It's like a practical problem that I think that we as a community really need to be sort of aware of, and I guess help to lobby for that government put resources towards deliberation and engagement in those times when it's so badly needed. Anyway, thanks. I just want to make this brief point.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Okay, Ellen.
So I just want to react to 2 points. One about the chicken and egg regress, like where do we start? And these mini publics can't work if we don't have a background of equality. And well, I think we have to start somewhere, you know. So, and what I've seen is that these mini publics, you know, they've been conducted actually for 25 years by the CNDP in France, which is a public deliberation sort of agency in the French government. It's pushing for it, but they don't have much impact because, I don't know, they're not publicized properly. You don't hear much about them. When the difference with the Citizens Convention on Climate Change is that it did have a lot of impact. It did have a lot of media coverage. I'm not sure exactly why, but it jailed. It was supported strongly by the French president, so I think it really helped. And then you see things that happen that completely surprise the organizers themselves and have ripple effects that are very hard to measure, but I think are excellent. So I told you about this guy who came in unsure whether he would stay and is now turned into somebody who wants to go into politics. Well, there are a lot of people who are going to go into politics after this. There were a lot of conversations that they initiated in their region of origin. So you have all these ripple effects that we're not sure what effect they're going to have, but I'm sure they will have an effect. And it's the first one of this importance in France. So imagine if we did that on a regular basis. Imagine if we institutionalized something like that, like that what they're doing in North Belgium at the moment. And if we had a referendum down the line on the proposal of this convention like they did in Ireland, I think these things long term are going to change they're going to educate the larger public. And yes, it won't be as spectacular a transformation as the transformation that people experience when they're in these bodies, but you could also multiply these bodies from, you know, the city level to the regional level to the, you know, sub-federal level when you're a federation. You could also expand laterally to workplaces, to hospitals, to universities. You know, if you start doing that to schools, if you start doing that everywhere, then you're educating everyone. And that's why I think the question of resource, as was just said, is absolutely crucial. It's not that expensive, actually. It's in the grand scheme of things. It cost 5 million euros to organize this convention. The Great Debate cost 11 million euros. Elections cost hundreds of millions in comparison. So surely we should invest in the infrastructures of our democracy, because I think the payoff are going to be enormous. We just need to just invest in that. And then I just want to make a point in response to Sergei when he said, well, there's no time for deliberation in a time of crisis. I think that's a very common argument. I understand it. I'm not sure I respect it. I think that if you institutionalize bodies like a permanent citizens' assembly, then it can be mobilized extremely quickly. And in fact, I saw it, because when the COVID-19 happened, this convention, which was already there, you know, it was already there. The 150 were already mobilized. They just, like, in the blink of an eye, they convened a new meeting which wasn't planned. Everybody showed up on Zoom. You had 300 people at one point on Zoom, 150, or most of the 150, I think 127 online, some people on the phone, and then you had all these researchers and journalists watching, and they made a decision very quickly, which was to set out, put out a press release and a message to the nation. And so there is time to deliberate. It's just not true. You know, it depends on where you start from. If you have to start like selecting the citizens and, you know, planning the thing, yes. The Great States did. I mean, this was decided overnight. In mid-December, Macron said, I want the entire nation to be deliberating about what to do in January. Okay, so it was really short term. It was really, I know the people who organized this didn't sleep for 2 months. So in the end, it started mid-January. Is that correct? Yeah, mid-January to mid-March. So you can find the time if you believe in it and you invest enough money and resources, you will be able to get the deliberation going in time.
Yeah, I just, if I comment, I didn't say it wasn't time for deliberation. I said that there are more objective difficulties for deliberation, depending on the political cultures. But I didn't rule out the deliberation. So
Just wanted to.
The words are not mine. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so let me see. So Larry, would you step in next? Where is, well.
Yeah, I'm here, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Just was doing the dishes while listening. I just wanted to suggest that better way to discipline our talk about the quote, to avoid a kind of technical essentialism, or a way of thinking about this platform as if it has a certain essential nature. Because I think that the point that I'm trying to emphasize is the highly contingent way the internet functions based on, for example, the business model of those who own the platform. You know, and it's not that there is a business that owns the platform necessarily, but it is literally the business model. So, you know, if Facebook were not selling ads, Facebook would be a different platform. It would have a different relationship to politics. It would have a different consequence for political polarization. And I think that what we need to do when we talk about the internet is find a way to be much more sensitive to the diversity of internets that we've seen historically. Obviously, the internet of 30 years ago is not the internet of today, and not because it's slow and this one's fast, but because there was all sorts of differences in how it would be implemented according to those who own the platform. And if we develop that sensitivity, I just feel like we could make more progress in thinking about how to tune the platform or the environment to achieve what we socially need to achieve. So that's what I wanted to suggest.
Mm-hmm. Right. Brendan?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to say, in reference to some earlier comments I saw that Francis posted, an issue of a problem of trust in experts, that, you know, my comments with respect to Elaine's position was that, just to be clear, that experts do have knowledge, and that knowledge ought to be respected. It's how that knowledge gets translated into social problem solving. But I did also want to echo something Lisa was bringing up, and I believe Albena mentioned in her talk, though I will have to watch that later, and that is that the wider social conditions that make publics operable and successful require changes to, you know, basic institutions, most specifically education, and good points were made about that, but also the point about the fragmentation of the internet. Now, Larry just mentioned there could be a new internet, but that clearly is one of the obstacles that allows us to thematize the problems that are getting in the way of and preventing the kinds of solutions people are looking for in terms of public deliberation and publics and other things. And I appreciate the emphasis on, you know, the commodification of those types of spaces, because they do habituate us to certain types of activities which run against the norms that we would like to see realized, both in wider society that would make publics possible, but also are part of a larger system that lends to the precarity that makes it much harder to cooperate and have these types of solutions make their way to you know, wider publics in our states. I do think that something that hasn't been mentioned, at least in the talks I've heard, is that there are a wide variety of practices that are being used in informal spaces and informal economies by large percentages of our population globally that are networks of things like mutual aid and these other things that are also epistemic resources for us to see what's working to solve social problems that I think might inform our theorizing about publics and states and other things. And I just think that's a really rich empirical area to sort of inform our theory.
All right, thanks. Saivar, you wanna? to that?
Yes, thanks. Looking back over what has been discussed today, I think that I think it's pretty premature to say very much about whether the roles of experts in politics is really gonna change. I mean, if it's gonna be a lasting change. It seems to me, at least here in the sort of European and the Scandinavian context, where politicians have more or less followed the advice of the experts in relation to the sort of epidemiological side of things. But when it comes to money, things look very different. Now we have this huge economic crisis looming. Governments are taking over huge sectors of they are taking over big corporations, airlines, and whatnot, and there the things look very different. You don't see the experts. And here in Iceland, for example, we had these wonderful meetings which we spoke about earlier today, where we've had the troika talking to the nation and explaining why we are doing this and that, and doing this wonderful job. But when it comes to the economy and these things, it's back to old school politics, and it's even worse because we're in a rally around the flag situation, where politicians, you get this bargaining within the government, and then they introduce, what they have decided to do, and then the question is how to push this through government, and so on. So I think it's, we're sort of in the thick of things now, and this is not nearly over. It's just a comment I wanted to make. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Okay, great. So a series of very interesting comments. My feeling is that those of us who have been staying for most of the day might be getting a little tired, so I think we should quit soon. I'm tempted though to pick up on one thing that we have been talking about, which is the impact of many publics. And Jose also mentioned here before, the question, which I think is a problem, which has been sort of discussed a lot for the last few years, the connection of many publics to the wider public. But my guess is that on the one hand, there are various ways in which you could integrate many publics with the wider public. So if I pick up on what you were saying, Jose, the problem really becomes a problem if we think of the many publics as authorized to actually make binding decisions, which is probably not good or strategic, but that also creates the impact problem, because the kind of mini publics we have, whether they're consultative or whatever role they have, they are easily subverted. So the problem maybe is that we can have these wonderful experiences of people who participate. We can have excellent discussion. We can have very well thought out results. We can have, whether it's consensus oriented or something that's done like a deliberative poll via surveys. But in the end, the problem becomes that it's put in the hands of the administration, the executive, who then may or may not do anything with it. So the problem of transferring all this democratic achievement, let's put it that way, into the actual public administration, into the actual enforcement of something, is, I think, a very very difficult problem. It's and maybe that's something that needs to be addressed specifically. You know, how can the deliberative methods actually infiltrate governmental practice, because that we really don't see. Just to throw out something that I think is still a big problem in this respect.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and me as well.
I wouldn't immediately grant that mini publics shouldn't have decisive authority. On the contrary, I think that Christina Lafont has an excellent book where she makes that argument that giving them authority would be short-circuiting
Exactly.
participation, all that. I think it's an interesting argument. I don't think it's a slam dunk against mini publics as decisive authority, in part for the reasons you say, which is that if we don't give them some kind of power, they're purely decorative, ornamental. They won't change anything. And as to infiltrating existing politics with deliberative norms, good luck. So I think we have to give them some power, and I don't see why it's such a problem. The same way we give elected assemblies decision power in a way that's not exclusive of trying to cultivate deliberation in the larger public sphere, beyond elections even. I just don't see why we can't have it both ways. Like, why can't you give mini publics some kind of decisive authority and cultivate authority? I just don't, and it's also not true that purely consultative bodies have zero authority always. The case in point is Ireland, where the two successive mini publics managed to recommend changes to the Irish constitution, and they convinced people twice. Yeah. The referendums on gay rights and the referendums on abortion rights, they come from successful mini publics. So I think it's more complicated than one way or the other.
Yeah, sure, I agree. Victor wants to say something, but just before I allow him in, I mean, I'm not saying that there is zero impact always, but the mini publics are at the mercy of someone. So there is, and that tends to be the problem. It could be seen as an authority problem, but it could also be seen, I think, as an epistemic problem, because it is difficult, even impossible in some cases, for the officials to really translate into policy what the mini publics have decided. But I'm not making generalizations about everything. I think this is different. But Victor, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, Ellen kind of said it while I was typing and sending that. I mean, I guess it depends what you mean sort of by decisive authority. And like in the case of Ireland, they had authority to sort of formally propose something that was then voted on in a national referendum, but they didn't have the sort of ultimate authority to make the decision. So I was just going to say, like, I guess there are stages of authority, and so we need to be clear about what we mean by that. And I do see some problems with having like ultimate authority in mini publics, because there's a lack of sort of democratic mandate or democratic accountability when you choose people by random instead of everyone having a chance to sort of take part in a process and voting or sort of having a say in the matter. So from a sort of democracy as a human right, equal human right for everyone, it would be problematic if we gave sort of ultimate authority to a randomly selected mini public. But I think it's interesting to say sort of where's the spectrum of authority that we can give to mini publics. And I was going to say, actually, I think the sort of Irish, British Columbia, Icelandic approach of having sort of a right to proposal, a formal right to proposal followed by a referendum, I thought is a nice sort of compromise on that.
May I jump in, John?
Yeah. Well, Larry had asked to jump in, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in the same line. I think that we should think about the procedural authority. The ability to set the agenda is a very valuable power, and it's usually enough to get people to pay attention and to take it seriously. So if the only outcome of the deliberative poll were that, a Congress would have to consider the proposal and deliberate on it in the model of Ireland, that would most likely be enough to get people to take it seriously enough. As long as it just wasn't ignored or nothing was done with it, which might have happened in some countries that we can identify, it would be enough to keep the energy going without going the additional step and saying there's any automatic power to it.
Mm-hmm.
And please note that if we're willing to give a mini public that kind of authority of setting the agenda, even if it's not the ultimate authority of deciding, we're already acknowledging that they have some kind of democratic legitimacy, not conferred by election, but conferred by something else that remains to be theorized. That maybe it needs to be sort of officialized and legalized through a constitutional moment or referendum or something. But for me, like this idea that you can have democratic legitimacy only through elections or the decision of elected representatives.
There was a...
Yeah, just can I just clarify a little bit? Well,
okay.
Yeah, I agree. I don't mean like just through elected representatives, but more through sort of the opportunity of citizens broadly to participate in the decision making, for example, through all voting, like referendum or so. So I would just to clarify, I wasn't referring just to elected representatives as the only legitimate mandate.
Jose.
Yes, I think maybe trying to be more ecumenical and trying to find some common ground. I think Hélène, you made a case before for extending and replicating many publics and and reproducing them here and there. And I think that idea, I think it's interesting, and it comes to the Jenny Mansbridge idea of deliberative systems, which I think should probably be the one that we should all be buying here. So I think that several of you have mentioned today that it's not about organizing one mini public or reproducing this experience or doing that single thing. For many reasons, there's no solution that fits all the problems that we have, and any kind of experiment that we want to make is not going to be enough actually to transform and to have the power of transforming the society in the way that we all want. So it's all about having the right equilibrium between these different kinds of mechanisms and procedures. And I think, Hélène, you were not closed to the idea of having other kinds of procedures and mechanisms and deliberation. And again, I think so. This brings me back actually to something that Larry said. Because I think that what it's critical in the kind of society that we live today, and it will be even more critical in the future, is that we are able to reproduce something, some kind of infrastructure with the same role that the old cafe used to have for democracy in the 19th century, right? So that's the Habermasian idea that you meet other people in the cafe. One of the things that cafes has is that you meet people who think differently, right? So the people in the village, in the town, they meet in the bar or in the cafe and they have conversations and discussions. And this happens in an informal setting. I'm super keen on organizing citizen assemblies and other kinds of mini publics, but I also think that it's critical to have this kind of informal conversation going on among people who think differently. And there, I think that Larry's comment about the infrastructure of the internet is critical, or the business model that many of the companies that are running the social networks today is critical, right? So we need probably to change that and innovate there to try to reproduce this kind of common ground that the cafe used to be in the 19th century or the 20th century. I think that's critical.
Mm. Yeah. Also, I just wanted to say the when we're talking about many publics and what they do, I mean, the tasks are vastly different. I mean, a citizens' convention on climate change, is something huge. For someone to really begin at zero and work him or herself through all the things that you can know about climate change is a huge task. But then a mini public can also be about something very small. Should we build a bridge there or have a memorial there or something like that? So in a way, the the question of scope and task is also pretty important, because it's easy to see how well-defined tasks on the administrative level can use mini-publics very efficiently, but but then you would like to have something more, and that's maybe once the mini-public itself is determining, for instance, what it does and so on, things can become very complicated, and the relations then with the legislature, with the government, pretty tricky. So I think that's maybe also an area that makes it difficult to say something in general about mini-publics. So maybe unless someone wants to make is anyone who wants to make the last comment?
Just following what you just said, Jan, I mean, is it really a good idea to have a lot of mini-publics at the administrative level that have really, I mean, if it is unclear whether or not, they will be consequential and so on. I think that probably, I know that's not what you meant, but, that's often what happens. We have mini-publics and then it's very unclear what happens to the proposals. It's not like, for example, in Ireland, where you know in advance, okay, this will go to the parliament and then it will be voted on in a referendum. I mean, if you have a procedure like that, you have, I mean, it's much more meaningful. And I fear that if we're doing a lot of mini-publics that are not meaningful in this sense, or do not have this, are not authoritative in this way, then we will undermine the mini-public sort of phenomena. Mm-hmm. So I worry about that.
I agree. I think we've done mini-publics for 25 years. It's time to, get them to actually influence politics. Mm-hmm. So we need to institutionalize them and give them power. That's my view.
And empower, institutionalize, or institutionalize empower.
This is when we say amen.
Yeah. Okay, so this has really been a great day. It's almost 6 o'clock here. I guess Bakar is getting close to 10, right? And Moscow 9. The afternoon is starting in the US, in New Haven and Boston, right? So yeah, thanks a lot. We haven't talked about this, but of course the whole session has been recorded, and we will be in touch with you about that. We would like to put the videos of the individual talks and comments on our site, but we won't do that unless we get in touch with you first. But I think this has been a great, for me at least, a great and fruitful discussion for the whole day. So, and I hope we can continue.
Good meeting you all.
Yes, that was really great initiative. So thanks, Jan, and thanks for all the organizers and the participants.
Thanks, Jan.
Jan and everyone.
Great.
Thanks, Jan.
Bye.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Until later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Já, ég þori ekki að loka fundinum, sko, því að ég host, þá slekkja á öllum.
Já, þú skalt bíða þangað til. Við erum einir eftir.
Já, einmitt. Já.
Hérna, gerði Þórhildur þig að host, sem sagt?
Nei, þú gerði það, held ég.
Já, nú var það þannig. Já, Þórhildur er alveg rétt, þú ert host og hún er co-host.
Já, ég búin að vera að gera fólk að co-hostum alveg hægri vinstri í þessum dag.
Flott. Heyrðu, en ég ætla þá bara að láta...
Þetta rúlaði rosa vel bara.
Var ekki? þetta var mjög gaman bara og áhugavert.
Já, þetta var rosa þétt samt svona.
Já, ég ætla að skrifa, ég sendi posta á allan hópinn bara í kvöld, takk öllum fyrir og og þá nefni ég það líka ef fólk hefur eitthvað á móti því að við séum að birta upptökurnar, að láta okkur þá vita, en síðan held ég veit